We are calling our Chino City Council and the successor agency to the redevelopment agency to order. This is a workshop. Please note that all council members except Council Member Burton is present. Pardon me?
Yeah, she said that. Okay. You're correct.
I did. Mayor Pro Tem Comstock, would you lead us in the flag salute,
Yes,
please?
ma'am, thank you. Will you please join with me in saluting our nation's flag? Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is public communication. This is the time and the place for the audience to address the council on any item that is not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our discussion items. Item number 1, amendment to Title 12 of the Chino Municipal Code. I'm going to request a staff report from Jesus Plasencia, our Assistant City Engineer. This is to receive a report and provide feedback for an amendment to several sections of Municipal Code Chapter 12. Jesus?
Thank you. It just turned on. Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I could, as way of introduction, discuss the proposed changes to Title 12. Title 12 is a street section of our municipal code. In the past year, the council has seen at least 2 requests and one prior to that for a waiver of certain provisions of this section of the ordinance dealing with dedication and or improvements of the right-of-way for certain projects that maybe were smaller in size, but the code has a very low threshold right now for when a property owner is required to dedicate right-of-way and or improve that right-of-way commensurate with a development on their property. So the council had requested a workshop where staff could look at some alternatives or some different ways to address those issues and some modernization to this section of the municipal code. And so that's what staff has been working on. And so Jesus is going to go through the recommended policy changes. And so we have 4 different areas, and we have a proposal for the council. And so we would like the council to tell us if they agree with what our recommendation is, or if they want us to modify it. So that way we can go back and then bring a fully developed ordinance to the council at a regular council meeting in the future. So, Jesus.
Good afternoon. So the first chapter of the municipal code that we're proposing to amend is 12.02. It's protection of interests within the right-of-way. This is our chapter related to encroachment permit issuance. So it has information related to the types of activity that require an encroachment permit, the type of documents that you need to submit when you need an encroachment permit, and also what happens if you don't meet the terms and conditions of the encroachment permit that's been issued. So in this particular chapter, we really didn't modify it significantly or propose to modify it significantly. That is, we really kept most of it the same. We just tweaked the language to clarify the process as far as encroachment permit issuance is concerned. There were just really 2 main things that we wanted to point out for your information that we intended to include in the amendment, and that is, 1, consider the recently adopted road closure policy that the City Council approved, and also reference the city's a city staff policy that we have regarding repairing streets that are under moratorium. So with that one, actually, the council approved an ordinance back in 2017 that prohibited pavement cutting on streets that were newly reconstructed or slurry sealed. But it merely just prohibited the activity. But in reality, there are instances where you need to cut into newly constructed streets because it could be for like an emergency, like a water leak or a gas leak or something like that. So we need to have some sort of policy in place to describe the scope of work that needs to be done in order to bring the roadway back to the condition before they made the cut. So those are the two main things that we wanted to make you aware of, that we wanted to add to this chapter.
Jesus, I have a question for you. It's not related directly to this, but yet kind of. You know, we've been, or not we, but the Central Avenue 60 freeway has been undergoing a lot of construction. And I've noticed that they've started to repair the connection of the on-ramp, off-ramp, or the off-ramp rather, onto Central Avenue. So they've put down asphalt, but it's very uneven where it meets the current asphalt. They haven't done a good job at all. Is that their permanent solution, or are they going to go back and fix it?
Mayor, I'm not exactly sure. My assumption is maybe that's just the base of the AC that they've put in, and perhaps they need to come back and do a final lift of the pavement.
Well, it's pretty. It's at kind of the same height as the current, but at the ends of it, it's just sloppy and just bumpy.
I think that's probably a question for Amr, who's out sick today. So
Oh,
we'll make a
okay.
note of that, and we'll check on it to make sure. Like when they did the other bridges at Benson, there was a temporary, and then they came back and they fixed all of it. I know that Maria was working on that, so let us check that, and
Okay.
then we'll make sure that they're gonna fix it.
Because it's not done well. Okay. Now, when they do have to cut from an emergency on a street that's under a moratorium, I know that in the past, when they've done that, the repairs just have, most of the time, are not adequate. They're very uneven, they sink after a while. Do we request any kind of a deposit or anything like that to where you can make them come back and fix it the right way?
In the ordinance, we do require a deposit. I think in the past, when it comes to projects like for gas company and Southern California Edison, I don't think that we necessarily always collect a deposit, being that the scope of work is pretty minimal.
Okay. Well, I know throughout the years we've had some issues with street repairs from utility companies cutting in them. Okay, thank you.
So the next chapter that we're proposing to amend is streets. So this is our right-of-way dedication code chapter. So basically, this chapter indicates that upon the issuance of a building permit, you are required to dedicate right-of-way. And it does include several exceptions. One in particular seemed pretty restrictive to staff. And that's the one that's on the slide here. So basically, an exception can be granted when building additions are less than 5% of the existing floor space. So what staff did is we surveyed neighboring agencies to see what they might have in their municipal code as it relates to exemptions. Based on what we are seeing, we think there's an opportunity here to expand on the exemptions, provide some flexibility for various projects. And so what we're proposing is, instead of having the less than 5% limitation, we're proposing to grant exceptions to single-family residential additions less than 650 square feet, accessory dwelling units, accessory structures like pools, garages, patio covers, and commercial industrial additions, provided the value of the addition is less than 10% of the assessed value of the existing building.
Okay, I have another question. I'm all full of questions today. This is to waive the right-of-way dedication.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be wiser to accept the right-of-way dedication but not force them to do the improvements? It just doesn't seem right to me that we wouldn't get the right-of-way that we need eventually.
Well, we're going to cover that in another slide. So this is just related to the right-of-way dedication, and there is some process that you have to go through with right-of-way dedication. So for one, the applicant has to hire a licensed surveyor to put together a legal description that staff has to review and approve. So there are not only fees that they pay to the surveyor, but there's fees that they pay to the city for our review. So I think the idea is that when you get these smaller projects, that perhaps this is could be considered a cost burden, and so that's why we're trying to implement some flexibility.
Is there any consideration for, on these very small projects, the city picking up the cost for the surveying and waiving the permits so that we can get the dedication? Because what I'm thinking is, especially like in the county areas where there's little, not county, but where we're gonna annex areas and stuff, and maybe some of our older areas where they'll do little improvements, we eventually are gonna need that whole right-of-way. It seems to me that it would be wiser to get the right-of-way any chance that we can and not force the improvements until there's a big enough area to do so. So I'm wondering if you've looked at what those fees would be on these minor projects, and would it be wiser for the city to accept that burden on these real small projects so that we at least get that right-of-way for future improvements of the roadway?
Yeah, it's essentially the cost of the surveyor and then the staff time to process the documents and recordation fees. So it's not a huge amount for the city, and it's to our advantage to obtain the right-of-way. But it can be a hurdle for the homeowner that's doing the project, that would have to pay, conceivably another couple $3,000 on top of their current project costs. So for the city to do it, the staff time would just be absorbed as part of our regular duties. We would need to make sure that we maintained some budget for an on-call surveyor to do the survey work. So it would be, it's an insignificant cost, I guess, to the city in our normal course of operations, but would be a benefit to the homeowner to not have to absorb those costs, while the city could also obtain the right-of-way that is necessary. So that's definitely an option.
Okay, well, I would like that considered when it comes back to us. I think that's wise. I mean, we have looked at before waiving certain kinds of improvements for homeowners that say it's a burden. But I think, I'm thinking of maybe along Phillips Avenue between Central and Vernon, all that area in there that now has, we're gonna do the park, and we've got a parking lot there that was done by the complex on the south. But all those parcels along there, we don't have the dedication, so I'm thinking it would be wise to get those, and accumulate those. I think it would be worth the cost to the city to do that. Comments? No?
I have a comment. I agree with you. I think, I'm just taking some notes here for later for staff, but like the project that Councilmember Pocock pointed out when he was here. We have that small parcel that I know that staff is working on, right, for Walnut between, Pipeline and Ramona, where we annexed them into the city, but we just kind of, I think, been waiting for some project to trigger those improvements with the resident, right? And then we would probably ask the resident to do those improvements. So that happened a long time ago. I think that should have been part of that process when they came in. At one point, a capital improvement project to bring that into the city budget versus putting that burden on the local resident. I guess I'm trying to get my mind around when you talk about this and with staff, like, how do we help our local residents or our local small businesses with these right-of-way improvements? Unlike like a super huge, large development, I see Pat Loy here, right? I mean, that's they're two, to me, totally different like projects, right? But we're kind of treating both of them like on the same level right now under this section of the code.
Well,
And
this
for
is
me,
just
yeah.
the dedication
Yeah.
of the right-of-way,
Yeah.
not the actual improvements.
No, I'm looking at all of it, Mayor.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
all of it. Like, to me, that's what I'm looking for in addition to right-of-way and cleanup in this code, just briefly. But that was just a couple of notes I took. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Jesus. I know that you're probably going to answer my question here in about 3 slides. So,
So if I'm hearing the council correctly, we are still okay with having the limit of the 5%. So anytime they go over 5%, they have to do dedication. But in the instances where we have single-family homes, ADUs, or commercial industrial projects that are small in scope, we're okay with the city processing all of the necessary paperwork to obtain the dedication, instead of
be.
putting that burden on the property owner.
I would be, because we would like the property improved, right? We want to encourage people to invest into their property, and if that would be something that would prohibit them, I would rather we do that for them.
Yeah, and sometimes it does become a barrier. In the downtown area, we've been trying to widen alleys to make it work better for trash service and to help improve maintenance in the area. But sometimes when somebody wants to do an addition to the house and they have to dedicate 2 feet of right-of-way in the alley, that is an additional cost, right, on top of it. And so, to your point, it could be a discouragement to people being able to improve their properties. So,
I'm okay with that.
Very good.
I guess I just have a question regarding the commercial industrial. I'm sitting here trying to think of, some examples we gave right now were, to some residential properties. But are there any commercial industrial, examples you can provide that, where this would fit?
So, so this exemption is proposed would be 10% of the assessed valuation of the existing building. So what we would do is we'd look at the assessor's tax rolls to look at the current assessed value. And if the estimated valuation of their construction is greater than 10% of that, then that's when they'd be required to make to do the dedication. And in the case of the policy where the city facilitating it, it would be anything below the 10%, they'd require to do the dedication between 5 and 10%. And then anything above 10%, they'd be required to process the dedication. So they'd have to hire the surveyor and do that as part of their project. So 10% of building valuation, that would be a small addition. So that would be like if it's a commercial office building and they're adding a mezzanine or something like that, that would be pretty small. Or if it's an industrial building and they have to do an expansion or add some type of dust collection equipment, for example. So it's those types of very small projects that we're focusing on, not on larger additions.
what cities did the staff survey that they received this feedback that was in comparison to?
So we looked at the cities of Ontario, Corona, and Rancho Cucamonga. So we were looking for mid to large size cities that still have development activity to make it similar.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
So the next chapter we're proposing to amend is 12.08. This is our chapter related to the construction of public improvements. So we reference this chapter whenever we condition development projects to do public improvements along their property frontage. And currently, the code only has one exception. So that is for whenever residential additions or alterations are proposed that are less than 5% of the existing floor space. And so once again, we surveyed the cities, the neighboring cities, and determined that, there's an opportunity here to be flexible with respect to residential additions. And so we're proposing that this be expanded to allow for exemptions for the construction of public improvements for all single-family residential additions, ADUs, and accessory structures like pools, garages, and patio covers.
This doesn't exactly mirror the right-of-way dedication, does it?
No.
Is it 10%?
No, in the case of right-of-way, there's a 650 square foot threshold. In this case, the proposal is that it be all additions, being that,
So if you don't require them to dedicate,
There
That's-
are cases where they would be required to dedicate but not improve.
right,
So for example, if there's a home along Monte Vista Avenue, and there in that area, there's some additional dedication that's required and some lots that have already dedicated. But almost all of the lots have curb, gutter, sidewalk along the frontage. So if you had a house that was 1,800 square feet and somebody wanted to add another 900 square feet onto it, they'd be required to dedicate, but they would not necessarily be required under this proposed change to rebuild, move the curb and gutter 5 feet further out, build a new sidewalk, and then transition. And so that's where this becomes a little bit more critical, because for the single family homeowner, you may be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in public improvement costs. And those improvements sometimes don't make sense in the context, because if my lot is 100 feet wide, my neighbor to the south isn't doing anything, and my neighbor to the north isn't doing anything,
makes no sense.
then it doesn't really make any sense to make those improvements. And so that's why we focused on the residential. And we'll talk about commercial and industrial on the next slide, but for residential, we focused on single-family additions, accessory dwelling units, and any other accessory structures.
Are there instances where the property on both sides of the single-family residence that wants to add are improved to where we wouldn't make this one match it? The exact opposite of what you had said?
There are a few. I can think of maybe 2 in my mind right now. That's a much rarer circumstance, but it does exist.
Now, interestingly enough, if I may, Mayor, the ADU law was changed a couple of years ago that to prohibit cities from requiring public improvements as a condition to the approval of an ADU. But I don't see anything that would prohibit the city from requiring the dedication itself.
Right.
So
So we could at least get the dedication.
I know that requirement is prohibited when they try to do these lot splits that was approved under SB 9, but for ADU law, I don't see any prohibition on that, just a prohibition on requiring public improvements.
Okay.
And maybe, Mayor, if we have a couple of those places where we required that, and with the change, maybe staff can go out and evaluate where those locations are and consider, us bringing that back at one point, during a paving or a capital improvement project, so we can just get it right versus waiting now, because if we've changed it where we required a couple people to do it, it will significantly further delay now any of those improvements coming online. So maybe we look at how to get those consistent, throughout those neighborhoods where we've allowed that for that to happen.
Well, one that I'm thinking of 2 right now. One is a home on Mountain Avenue. That we,
That's the first one that came to my mind.
we couldn't get the dedication or the improvements. Someday that's gonna have to change. But then the other one is right there on Francis where we're building the new park. Because there's a new park, then there's that old house, and then there's the brand-new parking lot. And so that's not improved. So for a while, it's gonna be a little bit awkward and an eyesore. So you're gonna have 2 improvements and one that isn't, if they ever choose to do anything with that property. So maybe on those instances, they get special consideration or
Or variance.
something, or come back to council, and like Karen said, maybe it's something we put on our capital improvement list or something.
Yeah, because the council always does have the option to obtain right-of-way as well. Oftentimes, when the city is working on projects, we have right-of-way agent that can negotiate with the property owner to buy bits and pieces, slivers that might be necessary. So that's something that we can look at as we're scoping larger projects.
Okay, I just would hate to miss an opportunity to improve something that, should have been improved years ago and just never was able to for various reasons.
I agree with the mayor there, and I think, Nick, I think the important thing for our staff to hear on this is none of these projects are alike. They're all similar, but they're not alike. So we're gonna have to look at them like the one that the mayor just pointed out and say, hey, what makes the most logical sense for us to get this done, in the best interest of the community, the property owner, weighing out all the balances of the competing interests that are there going on. And I think that's very important for our staff to look at that and not to say, well, hey, this is what the code says, or hey, maybe we need to go back to the council and talk about this. So moving forward, I'd like for us to look at those things with a more particular eye so we can get the best project the first time through.
Yeah, and we will still retain the provision that allows the council to make decisions that deviate with the ordinance as we have in the past. So for example, the one that we recently, several months ago, that we brought on Walnut Avenue, where it was actually a code enforcement case. So an owner comes in, they're trying to make improvements to the property to bring it up to code, and yet the city is saying, oh, by the way, we need you to make these massive public improvements along the frontage. So the council said, no, we should probably give an allowance for that. So we'll still have that ability for those unique situations to bring those back to the council.
Sounds good.
So continuing with Chapter 12.08, as it relates to commercial and industrial development, as I mentioned earlier, there's only one exception, and it does not include any type of commercial industrial development. So there's no exceptions granted for commercial and industrial. So what we're proposing to do is amend the municipal code to allow commercial additions to be exempt, provided it's less than 2,500 square feet, but no more than 50% of the existing floor space. And then for industrial additions, exempt those projects that are less than 10,000 square feet, but no more than 50% of the existing floor space.
Okay.
So moving on to the next chapter. Oh, actually, my mistake. So continuing on with Chapter 12.08, there's another significant revision to this chapter that I wanted to make the council aware of, and that's related to the delay in the construction of improvements. So there are situations where construction of public improvements needs to be delayed, and currently in the code it says that it's allowed to be delayed where you have a project along a street block with less than 35% of the ultimate street improvements. And in that case, the city engineer, according to the code, would place a lien on the property until the improvements are constructed by either the developer, another developer, or the city as part of a CIP project. Staff reviewed that, and we think that that's problematic because if you place a lien on the property, then there's a good chance the lien will need to be lifted at the time that there's a property transaction, and that may not necessarily be coinciding with when the improvements would be constructed. So that's why we're proposing to change it so that the construction would be delayed when determined to be infeasible or impractical by the city engineer. And in that case, the city would collect a fee payment from the developer in lieu of construction that would be based on an approved engineering cost estimate.
Can you do me a favor? Can you go back to the first slide that talked about the industrial development? The first slide?
The dedication.
I'm just talking about the last two, the first one that you talked about,
For commercial.
for commercial industrial.
This one?
Yes. So I understand, like, for example, the commercial industrial waiving some of the improvements, like we had some problems with the pet hospital, where he was upset about all the improvements that he had to make, and he felt that some of those had to be shared by Caltrans, and that he shouldn't be stuck with the whole burden. But when we look at industrial buildings, where would you see that you would waive them? Well, for one, for them to add as many square feet or 50% of what the building is, but actually waiving their fees when we know that industrial buildings generate so much more money, and they're usually owned by larger corporations as opposed to just a family-owned business that's trying to do some improvements on their property.
Well, we could definitely lessen or remove that requirement for industrial, if that's the council's wish. The 10,000 square feet is the ceiling for this. So it would be no more than 50% up to 10,000 square feet. So if you had let's say you had a 15,000 square foot building, then you couldn't add any more than 10,000 square feet. So most of the industrial buildings, this wouldn't encapsulate the large 100,000, 200,000. This is more for buildings that are in the smaller light industrial areas where you might have single tenant businesses like a tow yard or something, or like a business park, right. So this would really focus on those types of structures, not the very large buildings.
Okay, and buildings that are, let's say, 10,000 square feet, we know those aren't large buildings. Those are probably business park type things where they put some sort of, you name it. It could be a mechanic shop, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is, if they're already in the business park, they wouldn't be required to do any more additional work if necessary on the street. So we'd waive that.
Yeah, depending on how the business park was structured. So if it was a industrial condominium where you had multi-tenant buildings, and so you had tenants in each of those buildings, and the lot was held in common, well, that 10,000 square feet applies to the entire area. So in those cases, they probably, if they were doing some type of an addition, they probably wouldn't be able to meet this requirement. But also, most of our business parks and industrial parks are along collectors and arterials that are more or less fully improved. So this might apply more to kind of the older industrial sections of town where you have a single operator on a single building, and where they want to do a small addition. And would we require them to make improvements along the frontage of, let's say, 5th Street or G Street or something, or F Street or something like that? So that's what we would be looking more at with this type of exception versus the larger scale industrial areas that have been developed in the city in the 80s, 90s, and currently.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
What about a business that's on a very unusual large lot that would like to improve, but the requirements to do public improvements would be astronomical because of the requirements. This would give them an exception to improve their business without being overburdened with improvements to things that just absolutely make no sense. Business would never be able to improve, ever.
Right, so if they had,
Circumstance like that right now.
yeah, so if they had a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot building, they could add on potentially up to 50% of the, of that, up to, you know, additional 10,000 square feet without having to meet this requirement. Under the current ordinance, their only way to achieve that is request relief from the city council.
Okay. Because I think, you know, we should encourage our businesses to improve anytime, any way we can, you know, without it being so overburdensome that it makes it cost prohibitive from them to improve their businesses.
I think for me, Mayor, one that comes to mind for me specifically is we have a bunch of older businesses that are contending in an older part of town with either railroad spur or different right-of-way there. There's several of them over, if you think about that, along Chino Avenue, in that area, I think that would.
South of Chino Avenue.
So, I mean, somehow we have to come up with a plan to improve those areas because they're blightful. I think that should be in partnership with a project with the city somehow. Plus, those are areas I think that people from across Chino Avenue into some of those areas, they would probably have more of a propensity to go down there and, you know, walk or jog or bike if we improve them in different ways, you know, make them more accessible to them. So it's hard for me to weigh in this one because I can't really think of one right now. I mean, there are some of them, but how it would play out in my head, so
I can think of one in particular, but I don't think it's wise to point
Right.
out individual businesses.
No, I'm just trying to envision them in my own mind. Like I can think of residential ones, I can think of different things, but this one, some of these are a little harder for me.
Mainly below Chino Avenue between Central and Benson, some of the real older areas down there that are still dirt, no sidewalks, you know, that kind of thing.
And we do have to balance the need to facilitate property owners to improve their property, but also if that improvement is going to attract more business
Right.
and bring more clients and everything, and the adjacent right-of-way isn't improved in a manner to facilitate that, that's the balance,
Yeah.
right? So we have to be careful about that because we do want them to also make those improvements that will be a benefit to the public, but also to their business operation as well.
So Nick, you're literally reading my mind right now. We have a business that wants to do this, right? We know that it's gonna bring in increased like vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic, potentially even bicycle traffic, right? For people that wanna go maybe to some of these areas, right? How do we balance that? How do we make sure that we get the adequate curb sidewalk accessibility in there? Do we now say to ourselves, okay, this business is making an investment in their property. Now it's time for us to go in there and consider us at the city. Now it's really time to trigger these improvements to these roads, to these streets, right? To service the community that's coming in there? Or is there an innovative way that we now work with the business? Say, hey, no, this is going to create a lot more vehicular traffic, pedestrian traffic. Is there some sort of incentive or loan or tax break that we can give them over a period of time to finance these improvements? Is that part of this? Is that part of the game plan too? Or how does that look?
Sure.
Because when they improve their businesses, they're expecting to get more business, more cars, right? So what is the balancing act in that?
Yeah.
Well, maybe some of the improvements can be waived temporarily, like one that you were specifically talking about because of the railroad, right? Maybe that's totally impractical to expect an independent business to do.
Well, I think yes and yes. One of the things with the proposed changes of the ordinance is that it will give staff the tools to address some of these outliers, so we're not catching everything with a giant net. But some of these more specific ones where we know something needs to be done, but we know it could best be done in stages, that's something where we can work with the property owner. And then what I'm hearing from council would be open to us bringing a specific maybe agreement or something forward for council approval to say, here's what you have to do now, and then here's what we can do in the future, so we can get aligned on the total improvements.
I don't know. I think my question is, if I'm one of those people, I say to staff politely as the applicant, hey, what's the general plan, say, for the city in this area over a period of time, right? Because you could take some of our own examples and say, well, the general plan says this is what we're going to do with it. But what happens is there's really nothing that triggers us coming back to some of these areas, right, and saying, okay, now it's time to do these improvements. So if I were the person, and you were saying, hey, we want you to do some of these things, or we're going to waive some of these things, I would say, well, hey, what does the plan call for in this area? When does the city plan to do it? Maybe if you have some people doing these things, maybe it's time for us to trigger that portion of our own plan to do these improvements, is what I'm saying in some of these areas. I don't know, but if that were me, that would be what I would say to our city staff.
And we're working, actually, the next, so we're going to talk about the next topic, the guiding principles for the general plan update. The next phase of the general plan is looking at alternatives. And one of the ideas that we're exploring is this idea of these focus areas where we know that there's some issues that need to be addressed long-term. And so we can bring specific policies to the council that would instruct us on how to invest in those areas and what kind of change we'd like to see over time. And so that's a policy tool that could be laid out, and so that will give staff guidance that when somebody comes in one of those areas to do a project, that we'll have a better idea of where the city wants to go with that, and we can advise them.
I think that's a good idea, Nick, because let's face it, these are all part of our plan, or I mean, at least our intended plan. And if we have somebody that's, ready to proceed with these, maybe it's beneficial, because nothing's going to get cheaper to build in the future. So maybe it's time for us to say, okay, now this is triggering us really, advancing this project sooner than we had planned because of what's happening in these areas. I don't think anybody's going to complain about us improving those areas and making them better for people versus waiting for longer periods of time.
So the last chapter that we propose to amend is 12.16, street trees. This is the code chapter related to the installation and maintenance of street trees in the right-of-way and other landscaping. So the main changes that we were proposing to make, one pertains to the language pertaining to the maintenance of parkways. The current code only implies that property owners are responsible for maintaining the landscaping along their property frontage in the parkway. We're proposing to modify it so that it's explicit. In addition, we are modifying the penalties and enforcement so that it's consistent with the city's administrative citation process. And lastly, we're proposing to modify the request that we may receive to modify the variety of street trees. Currently, the code indicates that the council may, upon request from a property owner, grant a modification to the variety of street trees in the right-of-way. But so we don't really get those that often. But when we do, that would most likely be reviewed by our Public Works Department staff. They'd need to evaluate it, make sure that it's consistent with our plans and our standards. And so what we were thinking is that perhaps it might make more sense for Public Works staff to process any kind of requests in that regard.
Now, this only deals with street trees. What about somebody's parkway that is just totally a mess, doesn't have any street trees? Is there language in there where we can still go to them and say, you have to clean this up?
So
Is that
this is a vagary in the code that we'd like to get clarified with this proposed amendment.
just trees?
No, this deals with all landscaping in the right-of-way. So right now, certain encroachments or certain violations have their own unique process. And what we're proposing is to make it consistent with the city's administrative citation process. So essentially, if you did have an issue with the parkway landscaping, that we would be able to handle it through a standard code enforcement process and procedure.
Okay, any questions on item number 1? Okay, thank you for your input.
So then the next steps are, we'll take the city council's feedback and incorporate that into the proposed amendments, and then city staff will then introduce a new ordinance containing the proposed amendments for city council's consideration at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2. Guiding principles for the 2045 general plan update and phase 1 outreach report. Staff report from Nick Ligori, our Director of Development Services. Bless you.
Thank you. So tonight I will be handing the mic over to Andrew Hill, our general plan consultant, who will be giving a presentation about the first phase of our general plan update and then what our next steps are. So Andrew.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, council members. So the general plan update project started up back in August, and through the fall of 2022 and the winter of 2023, staff and the consultants have done extensive community outreach that has resulted in a set of guiding principles for the general plan update. It's my pleasure to introduce them tonight for review and comment. I have a brief presentation in which I'll cover an introduction to the general plan update project. I'll recap the outreach that we did during phase 1 of the project, and then I'll introduce the draft guiding principles to set up for comments and discussion. So starting with a little bit of background, maybe for those who are watching at home, the general plan is, of course, Chino's blueprint for the future. It's really the roadmap for development and conservation in the community, and it guides city decision-making on a range of issues, from land use and development to circulation and connectivity, open space, safety, noise, housing, and environmental justice. Chino's general plan was last comprehensively updated in 2010, and as we all know, since that time, the world has changed significantly. Let's see. There we are. So since 2010, we've seen major economic changes in terms of the rise of internet shopping and online retail. We've seen changing offices and workspaces. We've also seen social and demographic change. The local population, like many communities across the country, is aging and also becoming more ethnically diverse. We've seen technological change. For example, we have Uber and Lyft that we didn't have 15 years ago. But there's also smart city technologies that are out there that can help with the efficient delivery of services. And then, of course, we have autonomous vehicles. They're already on the roads in Nevada, and they're coming to California. In terms of the environment as well, we're seeing hotter average summer temperatures and stronger winter storms. So all of these things are factors that are driving the need to change the general plan update so that we have something in place to address emerging issues. And then additionally, there's a host of new state laws that require the general plan incorporate strategies to address multimodal connectivity, climate resilience, emergency evacuation capacity, and environmental justice. So in this context, we've been embarking on an update to the general plan that'll be completed in 4 main phases that are shown on this slide. This is a snapshot of the overall process, and we're coming to the end of phase 1, which was really about understanding issues and opportunities. And as I said, an important focus of the community outreach in this phase one was on understanding from the community members what kind of place they would like Chino to be in 2045. The guiding principles that have emerged from this process really sum that up, and collectively, they're meant to describe a vision for the future of Chino. They're a major outcome of phase one, and they will guide the rest of the project. So tonight, I wanted to review them with you and get your feedback. So let me recap the outreach that was done in this first phase. To build an understanding of issues and opportunities from the community perspective, we engaged with a variety of different stakeholders. We did one-on-one interviews with all council members. We also did focus group discussions with a range of different groups in the community, from the Chamber of Commerce to developers, major landowners, but also representatives of the faith-based community and other community organizations. We held 4 GPAC meetings, our General Plan Advisory Committee, and we also did extensive outreach directly to the community. Our strategy during this phase was really to go to the people and meet with them at events around town. And so we set up booths and had some interactive activities at a variety of different major events, including the Halloween Spooktacular, the Christmas Parade, the Bark Around Ayala Park, and the Preserve Fall Festival. At each of these events, we set up tables, and we had iPads with quick, easy survey questions for people to answer. And we were able to make contact with a lot of people. In total, over 1,000 residents interacted with staff and the consultants at these events. We also did a special event targeted towards older adults in the community. We went to the Chino Bingo Extravaganza at the Senior Center in January. Separately, we also did a more detailed survey to get input on more specific input on issues and opportunities that need to be addressed as part of the general plan update. That survey was online, and it was live between October and the end of January. In order to promote it, we did a really robust promotional push. We had flyers up in locations around town. There were multiple email blasts, social media presence. We also had a gift card. We offered a chance to win one of $300 gift cards for people to take the survey. And in total, that led to 383 people responding to this more detailed survey, in addition to the people who interacted with us at events. Who did we hear from? Well, we heard a really even balance from all 4 council districts, as you can see on the graph at the bottom right. Interestingly, I think we heard a lot more from women than we did from men, which is interesting. But we really heard from a range of age groups in the community as well. Younger people, as you can see, the 30 to 45 range was accounted for a large share of the overall results. But I think that some of these lessons learned are for where we need to focus on outreach in the future. We need to think about strategies to engage with men as well as women, but interesting lessons learned. Some of the key themes from the outreach are shown on this slide. For example, people really strongly supported the idea of promoting strong community bonds, maintaining Chino's small town feel, expanding local dining and entertainment options, making sure that the industrial areas are separated from homes and shopping. These are all themes, as you can see here, that received high support from community members in the survey. In terms of priorities for additional city investments, we heard, again, strong support for more parks, trails, and recreation. Also strong support for art in public spaces and activities for youth, and also strong support for activities and programs that promote and celebrate local history and heritage. All of this input has been very useful for developing the guiding principles. It really gives us a sense of the community values and what they want to see in the future. So as I say, the guiding principles are really a key outcome of phase one of the process. They set the tone for the project, and they describe a shared vision for what residents of Chino want to see their community be in the future. They're intended to be broad, aspirational statements, not necessarily how Chino is now, although many of the guiding principles do reflect things that people want to preserve, but really the guiding principles are collectively a statement of what the community wants to see in the future. And the guiding principles will lead into the more detailed goals and policies in the draft general plan that will be developed later in the process. It's possible that the language of the guiding principles will become goals in the draft general plan. And they will be supported by policies that represent the actions that the city needs to take to make that vision a reality. In total, there are 18 guiding principles that represent the key themes that came out of the process with the community, and I've organized them into under 3 topics. The first topics, the first guiding principles, the first set of them are all related to people. And top of that list is a small town feel. That guiding principle really emphasizes that Chino's unique sense of place comes from its friendly, welcoming people, and it's family-friendly. It's a family-friendly community where generations grow up and grow old together. The guiding principles under this category also reflect the priority that the community places on high-quality police, fire, and community services, as well as the importance of creating and maintaining strong community bonds through festivals and community events that build hometown pride. Also emphasized here are principles related to having an active, engaged population and open government. The second group of principles all relate to place. The guiding principle for balanced community reflects that local residents want a vibrant community with a range of housing, employment, recreation, and sports opportunities for all, and that the community should have a clear development pattern defined by activity centers, employment districts, and safe, livable neighborhoods. Other principles under the topic of place help to define the sense of place that community members want, and they are vibrant downtown, revitalized commercial centers, attractive corridors and gateways, and a green and scenic city with easy access to parks and recreational spaces throughout town. And the final grouping has to do with patterns. And these principles emphasize, for example, that Chino will be a healthy city with an emphasis on nutrition, active living, physical and mental health, and environmental health, as well as smart growth practices. They emphasize that Chino will be a connected city with safe streets and a network of multi-use trails that tie the city together from north to south and east to west. And then other principles under the topic of patterns have to do with a focus on strategic investments in infrastructure and technology, building local transportation or regional transportation links, developing local economic engines, and promoting successful local businesses, as well as nurturing a respect for the past. So the guiding principles were reviewed by our General Plan Advisory Committee meeting at a meeting on February 22nd. The GPAC was supportive of all of these themes, and they did make some recommendations that have been incorporated into the principles that are before you tonight. The GPAC emphasized that, felt that we really needed to emphasize safety as a community priority, so that's been built into these principles too. They suggested a new guiding principle about Chino's role and reputation in the region. They wanted to make sure that the guiding principles address safe, convenient connections throughout the city, as well as regional connections. And they suggested that we add a new guiding principle related to open government, while also recognizing the role of community groups, congregations, and veterans in the community. Since February, we've taken the guiding principles out to the community again for more feedback at a couple of events, at the Chino Days event on March 18th, and then at the Healthy Chino Day on April 1st. You can see from the stickers where people were asked to, which of the principles resonated most with them, and you can see where people are placing their stickers. Not surprisingly, small town feel, high-quality community services, also balanced community, vibrant downtown. These are really the themes that are resonating with people. We took the draft guiding principles to the Planning Commission as well on March 20th, and they recommended bringing them to the council without any particular edits, although the Planning Commission did emphasize that a healthy city needs to involve more than just activity. They wanted to make sure that it's clear that healthy businesses and healthy food are also integral to a healthy city. So that is a overall look at the guiding principles and the process that has led to them. From here, where do we go? Well, today we're reviewing the draft guiding principles with the council. We're looking for your feedback. On that basis, we will then move into phase 2 of the project, which is about exploring different options and alternatives that can help realize the vision that's articulated by the guiding principles. We will be working with the GPAC in April to review some preliminary concepts for those alternatives and getting ready for a series of workshops, in community workshops, open house meetings in May, and another community-wide survey to get input on those alternatives. With that, I'll turn over any questions or comments.
Any questions, comments? It's a lot of information. It's a lot. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this item or have any questions? It's a lot of work. A lot of work, a lot of input from the community, which is good. I don't think any of it was a surprise, because it's what we've been hearing for a long time. So it kind of validates where we think we've kind of wanted to go for many, many years. No comments?
I agree.
Karen?
No, I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
Validating what I'm hearing from people.
Yeah, absolutely. Good job.
Thank you.
Now the challenge is just to get it done, right?
It's the fun part.
Yeah, well, it's the challenging part. But it's nice to have what we've been hearing for years and years and kind of where we've been going with our master plans for a long time. It's nice to hear that it's been validated, and it validates also why people love this community. So we need to hang on to those values and family principles. Okay. Next steps, Nick?
So next, we're working on the alternatives. So we just started that component. We're going to be meeting with our General Plan Advisory Committee this week to start that discussion and start studying some of those items. And those then will be coming to the Planning Commission this summer and hopefully to City Council in September of this year. And then that will get us into the next phase where we actually then go in and do a lot of the technical analysis, environmental work, preparing the EIR, and so that way we can get prepared to bring a full plan to the council in mid-2024.
Okay. All right. No questions.
No,
Good job. Thank you very much. Okay, then, with that, we are adjourning to our next regular meeting that'll be held on Tuesday, April 18, at 7 o'clock in these council chambers. With that, we are adjourned.